All right, House Human Services Committee, the strong, the mighty, those of us who are left. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And this afternoon, we are continuing our background information on childcare as we get poised to begin our work on the Senate bill, which was voted yesterday, and I'm presuming voted on third reading today. Yes, okay. So we will have it on Tuesday, and we can sort of officially launch into that. But in the meantime, we have been doing some background work around sort of the national scene and the resources that we have been accumulating here in Vermont in the way of reports and the results of those reports. And that is one of the things that we have asked the current witness to speak about. Well, I'll let you describe how you've been involved. I don't need to do that for you. But we're going to just take a quick rove around the room, just so we are missing a couple of members. We have one member participating on Zoom, and we have two other members who will be joining us shortly. But I just wanted to get going out of respect for your time. So hello again, Teresa Wood from Waterbury, also represent Bolton and Buellscore and Huntington.
Hi there, I'm Jessica Brunston. I'm from Shelburne and St. George.
Hi, I'm Ray Garofano, and I am from Essex, and I also represent Essex Junction.
Hi, Dane Whitman, I represent Bennington.
James Gregoire, Fairfield, Pleasure, Bakersfield.
Excuse me. I'm Dan Noyes. I represent Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Representative Gilbert choked Representative Noyes all up. You know,
I
was
very emotional.
Sorry about that.
Representative Payala.
Representative Payala from Londonderry, and I have Andover, Weston, and Winhall.
And then we'll go around the outside of the room as well.
Drake Turner with Let's Grow Kids.
I am Annika Hiawatha with Public Assets Institute. I'm Lyndon Mulvey with the Nebraska Group.
And I'm Lori, the committee assistant.
Great. Thank you all for being here this afternoon on a Friday afternoon after, especially for my colleagues here around the table after a long floor session last night and long this morning. So I appreciate your attention to this today. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Nasha, to introduce yourself and to share your experience about what Vermont is doing and poised to do.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really grateful to be in this room virtually. My name is Nasha Patel. I'm a managing director with Watershed Advisors. We're a small consultancy focused on scaling big ideas in education and government. And our leadership team, including me, previously led longtime efforts at the Louisiana Department of Education to make systems work better for kids and families. I worked at the LDOE for nearly 8 years, culminating as the leader of the early childhood team, the deputy assistant superintendent. And now as a consultant, I work with states, including Colorado, Missouri, and of course, Vermont, to think about how early childhood systems can make good on the promises of the funding available to them to support families and care and educate young children. As you may know, my colleague Elliot, who's traveling and couldn't attend today, and myself developed the report shared with you. I think you all have that in advance of today. But if you don't, we can follow up afterwards and make sure you have a copy. That report was required by the legislature, and it analyzed the Vermont's early childhood system and make recommendations to improve it. In the process of developing that report, we reviewed key documents, spoke with stakeholders inside and outside of state government, including providers of services, education and care, advocates, system administrators, parents, and more, and shared our thoughts and conclusions at multiple points in the process to receive feedback and refine our recommendations in order to make them into the report that you have received. We talked to those closest to kids in classrooms and applied a systems understanding to those challenges named to us as faced by people in Vermont every day. And here's what we found. Vermont's system of early childhood governance, specifically as it relates to childcare and early childhood education, is fundamentally broken and needs to be changed. The most important conclusion we reached as a result of all of the stakeholdering and conversations that we had was that for Vermont to achieve its goals for children and families, the state must make a single unit of government focused on an early childhood. A captain who wakes up every day with the ball to marshal all of the funding, all of the resources, all of the willpower that exists in your state towards realizing Vermont's vision for kids and families before kindergarten. That single empowered leader must be charged with and held accountable for a few things, including setting a vision for Vermont's kids before kindergarten, what they should be experiencing at each age, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 before entering school. Running the system the way families experience it as a mixed delivery model and managing different program funding streams towards a more coherent whole. And ultimately making sure that every effort at every level, the hyper local, the regional, and at the state level, is ultimately going towards the vision of improving access to quality at each age, regardless of where a child lives in Vermont. Through this project, we got to meet and talk with incredible professionals in Vermont who work every day to make this place a state where kids and families thrive. Our recommendations in the systems analysis, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail and go through more conversationally, are in service of making all of their efforts, all the resources they're spending, and all of the time they spend every day work towards achieving the full potential it can for kids, unhindered by a governance system that in its current configuration prevents that from being true. I can talk more specifically about some of the things that we learned or uncovered in our conversations if that's helpful, or answer specific questions about the report or other things as someone who has worked with a number of states and knows a little bit about early childhood governance from a variety of perspectives.
Thank you so much, Ms. Patel. Appreciate it. I think one of the things that might be helpful for us to have a little bit of a dialogue about is members, you can find the report on our website, and there is a brief executive summary, which kind of essentially just goes through the same things that Ms. Patel just did. So we're at a space, even, after reviewing the results of this study and thinking long and hard about what Vermont's system currently looks like, what it could look like, and both in the House and the Senate bills, and now the Senate has swiped that part out of the bill, but it still is envisioned in the House. Essentially what we've done is to take into consideration whether we felt like we could really implement, what your study recommended. And we came to the conclusion that we didn't really think that we could. And so I guess one of our approaches, what we've landed on so far, and we're quite a ways from being done, but is an approach that elevates early care and learning within both agencies, within the Agency of Human Services and within the Agency of Education, and trying to do that in a way that respects the current status of both of those agencies, and also tries to adjust some of the inherent problems that, at least in the House, that we have seen within the Department for Children and Families being such a large organization in Vermont terms anyway, in state government. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on, I'm sure you've, read the bills and been in contact with folks. So I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on sort of what we have ended up at least proposing and putting on the table.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to weigh in on that. So yes, I have reviewed the bills, and I agree that elevating early childhood, particularly in your services organization where it is a large set of services included within that organization, makes a lot of sense. And it gives you the opportunity to sort of say within each agency, someone should be responsible for making this work better for kids and for families. And we need that decision-making, those concerns, the ability to be more innovative, use funding differently, figure out how government can work better. Elevating that in both organizations, I think, does allow you to make progress towards that goal. And that makes a lot of sense. I think as long as government sort of artificially separates the way these programs are funded and administered, which is distinct from how families experience it. Families in Vermont and providers in Vermont are getting funding from both of these organizations. And parents, when they think about their choices for childcare, for school, for Head Start, they often don't think about the way that it is governed or managed at the state level. They think about what's available to them locally. So a lot of the emphasis on unifying within state government, or sort of having a single empowered state lead, is to try to cut through the noise on behalf of kids and families and make sure that the experiences that they have are as seamless as possible. I think that is hard to do when you keep it split yet elevated across two agencies, when the agencies serve such different purposes, right? When the services organization's orientation is always going to be different from the education agency's orientation. And that may be the point for you all. You may want to have that and to keep that and to say, we want to keep both focuses distinct and fund them distinctly. And I would just recommend that as you're doing that, to think about how you're gathering perspectives and opinions and real experiences and anecdotes from the families and the providers who are on the other end of that and who sort of are making the pieces and the funding and the requirements that come from those agencies work on their end.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions from committee members, just trying to open it up. I'll Representative Brumsted, I'll start, I'm sure.
Hi again. We actually had a conversation this morning about new Americans and BIPOC communities and making sure that they feel comfortable in the childcare options to them. And I wondered if in your interviews and analysis and talking with people in Vermont, if you heard much there, because as we think about solutions, we also have to make sure that we know what is seen as the problems as well and not just guess at that.
Yeah, so we did talk a little bit to different families and also to the organizations at the local level that support those families, right? That like are convening them together to have conversations, to identify the challenges and then elevate them up to policymakers. You have a very involved community at the local level in Vermont. It's exceptional and it's rare. And you have a lot of folks who are trying to figure out how to make this work for those populations for whom it is most challenging to access these services, which I really applaud. And I personally learned from those conversations really interesting ways that people are trying to solve the problems that families without cars or without resources or in more rural areas might access in trying to get to a school or a childcare or a Head Start provider, or even access resources to not just once they have a spot, can they pay for it, but even can they get to that spot if it's available to them, which I thought was really important and helpful. One of the things that also came up though in our systems analysis was the sort of captaining at the local level was challenging because each agency and each program set its own regional bounds differently, which meant that they overlapped or they intersected or in some ways, didn't align, such that trying to solve those problems on the micro level became even harder because who was talking to whom about what, and how those challenges were sort of bubbling and raising up to the state level was overly complicated, which is one of the reasons why we came to the recommendation of a single government unit. And I think the challenges that you're describing are not alone Vermont is not alone in facing them and in trying to sort of make the system work for populations that are changing in their state. And when their demographics are changing, it means that the systems have to adjust, and that can be really hard. So I think our recommendations were sort of aimed at an understanding of that, but there's certainly more understanding that could be done and more perspective gathering that could help underscore the challenges and the resources needed to solve for those challenges.
Okay, thank you. And I also would just add we know that you had thought that this one person would be, or one entity would be the right way to go. And we definitely thought about that quite a bit. The other issue besides what our chair described so well, which is really substantive and important, but also just that, as you say, what you saw on the ground, local control is very big in Vermont. And the idea of totally changing the system when we have a 2-year biennium and we really wanted to be able to make a difference for kids and families and focus this what we're able to do around kids and families makes it, we didn't want to become so embroiled in that conversation when people come from so many different places in order to get there. I just bring that up because I haven't had a chance to just talk with you and Elliot, but that's really, it's not that we totally disagree. It's just that we're also trying to be pragmatists a bit. And get-
Yeah, fair point. I think systems change is really hard. And I think you're right. You have a real spirit of local control, but not even just control. There's like local entrepreneurship. There are a lot of people who want to solve problems on behalf of their community in Vermont. And I found that really inspiring. And the recommendations, you know, whether or not you take them and you're the decision makers who have to sort of think about not just a decision today, but a decision tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow after that. There's a lot that comes with each one of these decisions, and I totally get it. But one of the reasons to sort of incorporate that into our report was that we had conversations with local folks who were getting stymied in their ability to make the things happen that they knew needed to happen for the kids and families in their communities. So I think elevating leadership within the agencies could help solve that, especially if they were pointed towards that kind of engagement and that level of focus. I think that would be really valuable and helpful in sort of intentionally making sure that those at the local level who do reflect both that local control component and knowing what's best for their communities and being closest to kids in classrooms, but also a real desire to make their communities better, can feel like there's a venue for change that is sort of reachable from their perspective.
So, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying thank you.
Okay. And I was jumping in before I forgot. I know, I didn't. So one of the things that ended up happening in the Senate is they took the whole governance section out, essentially. So from what I understand, the thought behind that was from the administration, like, okay, you're making all these changes in this program, and we have new leadership in the department. Is like, how can you possibly ask us to do both governance and make all these changes in the program? And I'm just wondering if you might describe maybe other states' experiences, or whether you think that is totally off the wall and we should either do one or the other first.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, as a former bureaucrat, my job was prioritization. I couldn't solve a million problems at once. If I tried to do that, I wasn't going to solve anything. And so I really believe in I really believe in the value of prioritization as a strong government leader. And I think it is what the taxpayers are entrusting government leaders to do. I felt that every day as a Louisiana bureaucrat. And I also think that both things happening at the same time can be really powerful. They can sort of together work through some of the challenges of change management. I've seen it in Colorado. We worked very closely with the Colorado governor as they were both launching a new Department of Early Childhood and launching a universal preschool program. That was a key promise of the governor and something that the voters also really wanted. And doing both at the same time sort of it got rid of some of the constraints of the regular box of government that says you have to do this the same time, the same way, on the same process. This is what we've always done. By having both the governance change and the new funding for universal preschool and a requirement to make it available universally, it sort of added to the urgency of solving the problems that existed in the system and made possible more solutions that people didn't even think could be pursued because of the politics, the system, the opportunities that were available. It gave more momentum, not less, to the changes that were sought. Mm-hmm. I think it's true, though, that if not done carefully and if not funded and if not successfully led, if you try to do two things that are really ambitious at the same time, both things could fall apart and be disastrous. And I understand weighing that against the possibility of success and feeling like it could be too much for any one leader or one organization to take on. And I think that's a real risk, and it takes real intentional planning and funding and political support to pull off, and maybe is not something that like every state can do at the same time. And it may make sense in a state like Vermont, which is smaller and has the biennium that you described. It may make sense to think about how you prioritize it. If I were prioritizing, I would prioritize the systems change before the funding. I think if you do the funding without the systems change, you may see unintentional results or consequences for one age population or another. And doing the systems change allows you to be thoughtful about implementing the funding across a whole range of ages, 0 to 5. I've seen other states, for example, and localities and cities that take on universal preschool sort of exclusively with blinders on and see challenges to affordable and accessible birth to 3 come up as a result unintentionally, and really just not what anyone wanted to happen in their system. And they then had to sort of scramble to fix it on the other side. And so I think that's like the challenge or the warning of trying to solve through funding what is really ultimately a systems concern.
Well, that was very eloquently said. And I think, honestly, what we're faced with here is both the unintended consequences of causing strains on the birth to 3, in terms of availability. And on the flip side, we still don't really have universal pre-K. And so trying to, we will hear from childcare centers that said, well, the pre-K funding is what is sustaining our programs. So the potential loss of some of that will be problematic and all of that kind of stuff. I know that we will hear that. Thank you for being eloquent in stating that those issues. One of the things that in Vermont's system on pre-K, we have essentially what's a quasi voucher system where, a parent can, take their 10 hours and say, I want to go to this, as long as it's a certified pre-K, you can go there, and it can be in the public school or it can be in a private. And, we have a mixed delivery system, but it's really sort of not the responsibility necessarily of the school system to assure access. It's kind of like, okay, well, parent, X, Y, or Z comes and says, I want to send my 3 or 4-year-old over to this pre-K, and they get a voucher to do so, and the money flows and everything's all good. That's not exactly the way it does. It's not as easy as that. I know that. It's not that simple. I know. But what has troubled me, and I'll just own this as my thing, what has troubled me is that we don't have universal access to preschool in Vermont, and we don't have equitable access to preschool. So in some communities, we have full day pre-K paid for with the Ed Fund. It doesn't really matter to me right now who pays for it, but we have full day access for anybody who wants it in the local school system. And then in other places, they don't even have access at all, whether it's through a school or a private provider. And so in the House version of the bill, we make a responsibility of the school system to either provide it or arrange for the provision, so that there actually is a locus of responsibility for assuring that there is statewide access to pre-K. And in my head, I envision something like we do here on kindergarten. You start to see out in the notices in the papers and in the electronic digital world, okay, it's time to register your kids. They're child finding out there. Okay. They're trying to find all the kindergartners and come register next fall's kindergarten. I envision that same sort of thing for pre-K. And, in our bill specifically for 4-year-olds. So I'm just interested in your thoughts about how to really assure universal access and equitable access to pre-K when, we call something universal, but it's not really.
Yeah, I love this question, and I really appreciate the chance to talk about this because it's really near and dear to my heart. I think when you were describing the efforts around kindergarten in Louisiana, we used to call that like they would beat the bushes to try to find the kids and get them to school. And I think there's so much opportunity to be doing the same in early childhood. So I really appreciate your vision. And also the thing that you named, I don't think you used the word accountable, but you were sort of saying someone is on the hook for trying to make sure that there is a spot for every kid, whether it's in the school, whether it's in a partner child care center, someone is on the hook for making sure that that happens. And that's clearly articulated and families know about it. And you as legislators know about it. It's like a well-known publicized fact. I really agree with that vision. And I think that is central to a lot of the work that we did in Louisiana. We really believed in that mentality of someone needs to make sure that there is a plan for every kid who wants a spot to be able to get a spot, and that they're commandeering the funding to make it happen, and to over time make sure that the spots that are available to 4-year-olds and really every age, but if you're focused on preschool, to make sure that those preschool spots are at a level of quality that they're not just available or accessible, but that families want them, that families are coming and lining up and putting in an application and trying to say, I want this spot, please put my child in it. I think that's like the exact right vision for what should be true of a universal preschool model. And I think there are so often times when universal preschool just means we take everyone regardless of their income level, but we're not trying to make it available universally, which those feel like two very different things. So I think that vision that you're describing as a driving force for what should be true in preschool is really helpful. I think childcare is an important partner in that, in the ways that you named, right? Schools can't serve all kids. They don't have the space. They don't have the facilities. They often won't have all of the workforce. And even if they do have the workforce, those teachers are funded and compensated and employed very differently than teachers in childcare and Head Start spaces. And so thinking about childcare and Head Start as partners to making that happen, whether it's through contracts with school district or some other way, having that sort of flow from a local captain who is on the hook and responsible for making sure there's a plan is a vision that I truly believe in and advocate for every day.
I love that term, a local captain. A local captain. It's so I'll say it for this is my Friday version of it, committee. When it's everyone's responsibility, it's no one's responsibility. Exactly. And that's what we have right now. And while we've made great strides, and we heard from people yesterday that, were very they were very positive about Vermont's, especially on the 4-year-old, in terms of participation in pre-K. It still was falling, in my estimation, well short of the universality of and the equity that we're speaking of. So, okay. All right. So I have monopolized sufficient amount of time. Does anybody else have any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Whitman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question's just been on my mind since you mentioned that a lot of families don't necessarily think that much about the systems and the divisions of government, but they think about what's available locally. And I was wondering if you heard, even though we have a number of different services, through outreach and what you've learned about Vermont, if there is sort of like a local office that is maybe more of a go-to than others for Vermont families within the current systems that we have.
I think in the current system that you have, it's not that intentional, but it could be. And I think that your question articulates a vision that could be true, especially in a unified early childhood system where you could say, go to one place, learn about all of your options and what you qualify for. And we will help make sure that you have the spot that works for your family, sort of in line with what we were talking about before. I think in Vermont, you have localities who are solving that problem themselves, who are trying to sort of elevate an organization, an office, a Head Start grantee, a school partner. But this is largely happening because the community is trying to solve the problem and not because there is a charge or a level of on the hook accountability, like we were describing before, to make that true. I also think that this happens more in your communities with fewer options. In your communities with more options, there's less need because people sort of feel like families will find them and they don't feel the same need or push to put that information out there. In smaller, more rural communities, there is more need to do that kind of beating the bush to make sure families know who they are. So there's more of that sort of unified focus that comes together.
Yeah, I would add, Nasha, that's an excellent answer of the sense of how Vermont is working right now. And also there's a lot of resource and referral. They're called all different things, but they're resource and referral. So it's when you're first pregnant, who do you go to say, I want to get on a list? It's all about access and not so much about, it is about quality, but it's really first about where can I get my name in so that I can start the process of looking at the quality. And also I think that Let's Grow Kids that has grown up over this time has also become that spot that people go to. But unfortunately, we might be setting them up because they will disappear in 2025. So this conversation is so incredibly important for us to be having right now.
I too think that this kind of conversation is important to be having right now because you all, like the rest of the country, are having a moment around early childhood. I think coming out of the pandemic, there are a lot of people who are thinking about early childhood differently. And so being intentional and thinking about how do we make this a process that families understand, but also that future providers, future teachers, future people who want to work in this space feel like is accessible to them or something they can learn and figure out how to operate or become a part of is really important. And so the ability to sort of across a mixed delivery model, because we know that no one provider can serve all kids and all of these programs need teachers and they need more spots and more spaces and more locations in places where families need them. How do you sort of make sure that one part intentionally of running an early childhood system is growing it, is making sure that the system can grow and can continue to expand in the ways that families need them to.
So as we look towards just what you just articulated there, one of the things that our committee heard a bit about earlier this week in a bill introduction is the after-school space and sort of the connection between certainly, if we have a vision, that every 4-year-old has access to a pre-K program, whether that's going to be in school or it's going to be in a other early learning site. After school space is really important. And I'm just wondering if you have any observations to share about other states or even the conversations you might have had in Vermont around after school.
Yeah, I didn't spend as much time in the after school conversation as I did in the early childhood conversation. So my takeaways are much more limited. But that being said, I talked to after school providers and folks in Vermont after school who shared, again, like this vision for what they thought should be real and true for kids in their communities around access to after school, but challenges with some of the bureaucracies related to being licensed by one agency, getting funding from another agency, trying to figure out how to meet the vision of one, which is really all about making sure families can work, but then also the vision of the other, which was about making sure that kids got these high quality, very intentionally defined experiences as not just school, but there was like so much focus on like outdoor and arts and other experiences that kids might not necessarily get in school. And I think the after school conversation, like the early childhood one, is so interesting because it is really a two-gen approach. It's both about making sure that adults can work and that kids are safe, but also about using the funding that's available when we're spending it to also make sure that the experiences that come out of it are high quality. It's an interesting point in Vermont in particular, because the rules around after school provision in K-12 and the rules for children under kindergarten are different in ways that are important to understand and can make it complicated for providers to offer after school or aftercare for children under kindergarten. And I don't need to get into the weeds of that. And I'm sure you have people who are sort of better qualified or better expert to speak to that. But it does like sort of signal the need for the system or the state, wherever it can, to take on that burden and to make it easier for providers, for the workforce, and for parents to be able to access those needed services, and to spend less money on the bureaucracy of it and more money on the quality of it.
Thank you. Other questions from committee members? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Representative.
If we have time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just realized, Representative Garofano, you had your hand up. I just realized that.
Okay.
I just realized that, sorry.
And then maybe more of a thought and less of a question. So forgive me, but interested in your thoughts, Nasha. I remember 2 years ago, there was a proposal to take our child development division. And the sort of criticism was that it was too much straddled in between the Agency of Education and the Department of Children and Families. And so the idea was to sort of divide it up and then sort of have those two departments absorb it. And what I'm hearing from you is almost a strengthening in the opposite direction, where actually we would want some sole governance to sort of, have that accountability. So I guess my thoughts, maybe this is more of a committee discussion, but this is just where my brain is. I know there's been a lot of conversations going on up to this point, but what about an approach that really just strengthens the child development division's charge to be that sort of leader, but coordinator as well?
I think that's represented in part of what you've named, which is elevating the leadership and the authority and the decision-making of that office. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think that is, Dane, exactly the sort of thought on the AHS side of things, in terms of Child Development Division and Family Services Division becoming a department. In AHS, that what that means is that you have the responsibility for leadership, and it doesn't go through yet another level before it gets to that sort of policy-making place, and there's more authority. And we did struggle, when we were looking at devising a bill, because the Agency of Education is set up very differently than the Agency of Human Services. And so trying to have something that seemed comparable in terms of that elevation of early childhood education and experiences at AOE, turned into a deputy secretary as opposed to a commissioner, or like it is in the Agency of Human Services, because just the construct of the whole agency is quite different than it is of AHS. So, I think we still have some discussions about, did we land on the right thing or not, and I appreciated your observations that, from your estimation, you felt like tackling what we call governance here, tackling the governance is important to do first, because you're not then setting up systems that you may then end up having to change when you have a different structure and different leadership. So that's something for us to contemplate as we go forward.
If I could just add one little thing too, and love to know what you think about this as well, Nasha. I think you were at the same conference, but last year when we were working with the systems announcement and you presented and all of that, I was thinking in the same direction as what you proposed, even knowing what was going on in Vermont as far as our Agency of Human Services versus our Agency of Education. I didn't really realize how limited Agency of Education is as far as departments and divisions, the way that it is at Department of Children and Families. But the thing that really hit me was when I went to the child care conference that Hunt Institute put on in Arizona, and I heard from all these other states who really had to embed inside of their Agency of Education, because so much of the federal funding is attached to the Agency of Education. And so separating too strongly could really cause some financial difficulties around regulations, licensing, all of those things. So curious what you thought. I think you were there as well, weren't you? Or
I was not at that conference, but I did hear a lot about it. I really appreciate this question. And it's hard for me to answer it without getting too weedy. So I apologize if I go too much into the details. I think that in the course of our system analysis, but also in the course of my sort of time and tenure as an early childhood systems person, really the options have come up as, consolidate in the Department of Education, consolidate in human services, build a more unicorn type model of sort of a hybrid option that sits under both, or create a standalone agency. And I've had the chance to work in a unified early childhood system under a state education department. I did that in Louisiana. And for the reasons that you named, found it to be incredibly successful. We really built a birth to 12th grade education agency and thought about the path to kindergarten as part of the responsibility of the school system, and help them to see how they could be managers and supporters of a mixed delivery model that could serve the kids they couldn't before kindergarten, but make sure that those opportunities were at a level of quality that helped to build towards kindergarten readiness and third grade literacy, which was very important in Louisiana. And I think people came to realize, leaders of the system, the K-12 system came to realize, every dollar we're putting into our K-12 system is at risk if we're not investing in our birth to 5 pathway. And that's really powerful. I've also gotten the chance to work in Colorado, where this was not built into the Agency of Education there, because the way that the Department of Education in Colorado operated, it didn't make sense. There was too much local control at the district level. There wasn't the opportunity to do some of the captaining that we've talked about today. And so it made more sense to form a standalone department that does have, some of the concerns related to federal funding that you named, particularly around special education funding or some of the other pieces. Not so much licensing. I think you can move the licensing funding, but there's other pieces of it that can be really hard. And workforce and teacher preparation is also harder to tap into. And that requires sort of stronger relationship building across the agencies. But having the elevated leader is the thing that mattered most across both of those contexts. Having someone who is saying, this is our vision for early childhood, and the challenges of then navigating that across multiple agencies is complicated, but they needed someone to have the ball to say what the vision was and to try their best to pull it together at the state level for their constituents to make it happen. As long as that leadership was separated, people were just operating with different priorities, with different bosses, within different structures and different ways of communicating and prioritizing. That just kept them from realizing their full potential. And when I say that, I'm not just speaking about Colorado. I think that's true of a lot of the states that I've worked with. So yeah, I hope I'm answering your question and I didn't go into too many weeds, but I just wanted to sort of talk about the global experience.
No, that was helpful. Thank you very much.
I think you have given us a lot to think about, and it's been very helpful for us to hear some of the sort of shared experience that you had when you were doing the research behind the report that you helped author for Vermont, as well as, hearing about what some of the work in other states that you have done. And it helps to give us some background about thinking about what's possible, and, and then we have to add the what's probable when we get here, and, mixing those two things, but having a clear vision, I think, is something that is important. And it might take us, more than one bill, more than one legislative session to get there. But it's been very helpful to have you help frame the background for us as we move forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to talk with you all today. And if I can be helpful again in the future, you should just let me know. Thank you again.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it. Take care. Okay, committee. That's going to wrap up official work for today. I just want to review with you our agenda for next week, because we have a jam-packed agenda for next week. Floor should return to somewhat normal again. Okay, so we will be coming back after floor. to do work here, by and large, although, watch the notice calendar in case something odd and peculiar happens that I don't know about right now. And you're going to see on the agenda when you get it that we do have some 8:30 start times. We are starting to have to sort of ramp up. Seeing the second set of pages leave today made me think like, oh,
We're
that's
2/3.
that's 2/3, not halfway.
Right.
That's the way I'm like, okay, we gotta, we've been working really hard up to now, don't get me wrong, but we now really have to be in, we're sprinting now, and not, taking a leisurely stroll. So we will start right after, caucuses and lunch, and, we're going to hear from Senator Hardy, who was the sponsor of the Senate bill, which has now passed the Senate. And we'll get a walkthrough of the bill from Ledge Council. We're going to start with some background information about how the CCFAP program runs now. What's the experience of families? What's the experience of providers? We're going to have an opportunity to talk to people who are running the program now. And we'll finish that up on Tuesday. Excuse me, on Wednesday, we're going to sort of fit in some folks that we had to postpone from today to give us also some background materials. But then we're also going to talk about with Joint Fiscal Office, the financial impact of S56 and what that looks like in terms of both financing and in terms of that curve that we talked about and the benefits curve. We're going to hear from another one that we had to reschedule from this week, a national expert on Head Start and equity in early childhood education and access. And we'll going to break up the week a little bit so that we're not all just talking childcare. We're going to break up the week a little bit with a vote to take H469 off from the wall. It's a bill that allows remote witnesses and in advanced directives. People who are here last year will remember we did that. There is a twist to it this year, and that's they're coming asking for a Ulysses clause to also be part of that bill. So we will do a walkthrough of that, and we'll continue on with the Vermont Association of Education for Young Children. This is about the status of the recommendations that they have put forth about how to compensate the educators in our early childhood programs. And we will hear from Dr. Morgan Crossman, who is the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures. They've been integrally involved in all things early childhood education, and Building Bright Futures, as you know, serves as the state's statewide advisory committee on these issues. We will hear from the director of the Vermont Ethics Network, Ms. Brucese. Some of you folks might remember her. Also, we will have students here testifying on Prevention Day. The OVX folks, Our Voices Exposed, will be here, and we will hear from them as well. We're going to hear about attendance versus enrollment, something we've talked about here multiple times. We haven't received the report yet, but we will, I'm sure, by the time that they arrive here on Thursday afternoon. And then finally, on Friday, we are going to wrap it up at noontime, but right after the House floor, we're going to be hearing from, or right after, I think we talked about before.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. I don't know what'll happen on the House floor, but so, and, coming back after House floor, I know everybody's kind of a bummer for people. I understand that. So we're going to meet at 8:30 on Friday if the witness is able to come. And that is Allie Richards, the CEO of Let's Grow Kids. So we'll wrap it up with Let's Grow Kids on Friday. And again, I am sort of letting you know that I'm hoping to have this ready by the third week of April. Doesn't mean we're going to be voting it out by that time, but this bill needs to go to appropriations, ways and means, and education. And I'm sure it will have considerable discussion in all three of those committees. So we need to be able to allow that process to happen. So just letting you know sort of
Do you think
what's in my head.
Conference committee?
I realize now that was a facetious statement. Yes, I believe that we shall have a conference committee on this, although it would be delightful if the Senate just accepted all of our changes. But that's not the way it works. Yeah.
I'll just mention in case anyone has any suggestions, but the following week, so not next week, but the week after, we're going to hear from families that are struggling with childcare or doing really well with childcare in their communities. We're going to hear from providers, childcare providers, both home providers and centers, and maybe even a pre-K / childcare program that maybe puts the two together in Addison County. And also from employers, businesses, how are they doing? What kind of solutions are they coming up for their employees? So if anyone here has some ideas, I'm moving forward on some ideas, but always willing to take more ideas, and then we'll narrow it down to maybe 3 of each of those types.
And I asked Kelly also to send some names in the after-school space so that we can think about that. And Lori is doing a little bit of research on 1 or 2 school districts that right now offer full-day pre-K and how they do that. And I realize pre-K is not our committee's jurisdiction, but if we're going to keep it in the bill, then we should have a little bit of background about knowing what it is that we're sending off to education. So, all right. Any questions? All right. Thank you for an exhausting week for most of us, I'm sure, and appreciate it. And Kelly, we hope you feel better. And we will see everybody. We will see everybody on Tuesday. Have a good weekend and enjoy something. I don't know. It's supposed to be kind of mixed weather-wise. So I'm going to prune one of my bushes this weekend because I remember Dane says now is a good time to prune them.